Young people aged 12 to 17 involved with both the child welfare and youth justice system are referred to as crossover youth. Crossover youth often have unresolved youth criminal charges and are involved with child welfare, both in and out of care. These young people face many unique challenges and are a vulnerable population that have often experienced complex trauma issues growing up. These can include complex trauma, which is often repetitive abuse at the hands of a caregiver or family violence. Single incident traumas, which could include an accident, a single incident of abuse or assault, or sudden loss. Developmental trauma, such as neglect, abuse, witnessing violence, death, or abandonment. Intergenerational trauma, which are basically effects of living with a trauma survivor. Or historical trauma, which would be genocide or the cumulative wounding over the lifespan. Trauma plays a major role in crossover youth's lives from a mental health, behavioral, rehabilitation, and safety and security perspective. It is therefore imperative that those working with crossover youth work from a trauma-informed lens and develop trauma-informed connections that focus on safety and trust, transparency, empowerment, anti-oppression, and youth voice, which in turn should facilitate healing and growth. Addressing child welfare is challenging enough, let alone when joined with deeper problems of criminality. Crossover youth often carry scars of trauma and pain, which can inform some of their behavior that might lead to contact with the justice system. It is for this reason that we need to better address the complex challenges and needs of crossover youth from a trauma-informed lens. In this video, I'm going to discuss trauma and how it impacts our young people. I will spend some time talking about the brain in relation to traumatic experiences, and some time reviewing the importance of adapting a trauma-informed lens. At the conclusion of this video, I will highlight some strategies to use when working with these vulnerable young people. According to the National Center for Child Traumatic Stress Network, trauma is an emotional wound resulting from a shocking event or multiple and repeated life-threatening and/or extremely frightening experiences that may cause lasting negative effects on a person, disrupting the path of healthy physical, emotional, spiritual, and intellectual development. Trauma generally leaves individuals feeling powerless, helpless, and immobilized. Trauma is emotional shock. It is unexpected and can transform a young person's world into a terror-filled, confusing, and debilitating experience that dramatically alters the young person's path into and throughout their adult life. It permeates their cognitions and beliefs about the world and impacts their ability to trust others. Trauma can be the result of a one-time incident or the result of multiple complex experiences in a young person's life. Trauma is the commonality of the lived experiences of many of the crossover youth. It is a huge perpetuating factor that draws these youth into the cycle of misconduct, which is why it is crucial to incorporate a trauma lens into our practice. Police, child welfare, judicial officers, caregivers, counselors, youth workers, educators, and the community at large are well overdue for a change in our perspectives of how we view these young people. A trauma-informed lens asks us to shift our narrative from what is wrong with you to what has happened to you and how can we be of help. Imagine how difficult and overwhelming it must be for these young people who often make great attempts to cope, whether it be adaptive or maladaptive. They are often simply trying to make sense of these experiences. As a result, these young trauma survivors sometimes struggle with mental health injuries such as anxiety, depression, suicidality. They can be harmful to themselves or others. They may develop addictions to drugs and/or alcohol, and they often struggle developing healthy relationships because of the lack of trust they have with adults. Hurt people, but I can assure you that the hurt that many of our young people may cause to others is usually never greater than the pain they feel themselves. With our crossover youth, we need to begin to appreciate that the traditional youth justice responses of punishment often re-traumatizes them and sometimes contributes to reoffending. Traumatized young people often experience fear, anxiety, irritability, helplessness, anger, shame, depression, and guilt. But their ability to identify and express these feelings is often underdeveloped and poorly regulated. Some of these youth may express emotions without restraint and seem impulsive, under-controlled, unable to reflect, edgy, oversensitive, irresponsible, and/or aggressive. Young people who have been hurt by loved ones often develop a loss of trust or withdrawal and isolation from others, which can lead to ongoing conflict and social problems. Trauma is an invisible injury to many and often misunderstood. The impact of trauma is uniquely different for young people, but can profoundly affect them emotionally, cognitively, socially, spiritually, relationally, and behaviorally. Trauma affects attachment, social skills, thinking skills, physical health, emotional health, hope for the future, self-concept, and the list goes on. What you see on the screen right now is an overview of an important study that was done in the mid-90s in the United States. The outcome of this research study, which involved well over 17,000 adults, was profound. This study is called the ACE study, or the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. What was discovered after interviewing these participants was that traumatic events in a young person's life could have negative, lasting effects on their health and well-being. The adverse childhood experiences we are talking about include abuse, such as emotional, physical, sexual, neglect, both emotional and physical, and household challenges, such as domestic violence, substance abuse, mental illness, parental separation or divorce, and/or an incarcerated parent. Adverse childhood experiences are the single greatest unaddressed public health threat facing young people today. I would strongly encourage all of you to look into this study further. These adversities cannot go unrecognized or untreated any longer. We have an obligation to give young people a chance. This is treatable and beatable, and we all need to take this on to ensure the proper supports are provided to young people who were exposed to these many adversities. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a mental health injury that is triggered by a terrifying event that can occur in people who have experienced or witnessed trauma. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, can be diagnosed after a person experiences symptoms for at least 1 month following a traumatic event. The disorder is characterized by a series of different types of symptoms, such as re-experiencing the trauma through intrusive, distressing recollections of the events, flashbacks, nightmares, avoidance, or feeling constantly anxious or on edge. PTSD can be a common reaction to experiencing something traumatic, which is an important area for us to be aware of with our crossover youth. Although exposure to traumatic events does not always lead to PTSD, traumatized individuals often experience some PTSD symptoms. They may report ongoing fear of the event occurring again, persistent flashbacks and nightmares, avoidance of things that remind them of the event, being on edge all the time, or just having trouble sleeping. The disturbance, regardless of its trigger, causes clinically significant distress or impairment in the individual's social interactions, capacity to work, or other important areas of functioning. Research in brain development has shown that exposure to childhood trauma can have a detrimental impact on young people's brain development, cognitive and behavioral functioning, regulation of emotions, and attachment. This can result in and has been linked to behavioral challenges in young people, risky behaviors such as alcohol and drug use, problems in school, and in some situations these negative factors may increase the likelihood that young people become involved in the justice system. It can also cause changes to the structure of the brain. It is these changes that in turn cause crossover youth to struggle controlling aspects of their behavior. They may act out or withdraw. Trauma hinders rather than helps human growth. With all of these changes occurring in the brain and developmentally, it is not unusual to observe crossover youth presenting themselves as being much younger than their chronological age. This is why it is so important that we treat young people based on their brain age rather than their chronological age, and meet them where they're at, both physically and emotionally. According to Bessel van der Kolk, complex trauma can impair the development of thinking, relationships, self-worth, memory, health, and a sense of meaning and purpose in life. When a young person has been exposed to traumatic events in their lives, their brain often activates a set of responses when they feel fear or danger. According to Perry, the continuum of these hypoarousal responses usually includes a flight response, such as running away, psychological disengagement, withdrawing from the outside world, dissociation. A flight response, which would be verbal vocalization, resistance, anxiety or aggression, or a freeze response, which would basically mean that they're tuning out to a threat, detaching oneself from others. In turn, the fear and threat they experience changes the way in which they think and respond, and the way in which they view the world, which is unsafe. I believe it is important that we help young people understand what their brain is doing and how trauma may have impacted it. The brain shapes not only who we are, but also the world that we experience. It tells us what to see, what to hear, and what to say. It stores all of our memories, both painful and pleasant. As essential as the brain is to our existence, it is still a mystery, and sometimes the brain may trick us into believing certain things that may be skewed as a result of our earlier traumatic experiences. Crossover youth should be made aware of the fact that trauma can change their brain. With increased awareness, crossover youth can seek treatment to address the symptoms and learn skills that could actually rewire their brain for recovery. The more they know and understand what is going on with their brain, the more they can be reassured that they are not going crazy and that they are not a bad person. Instead, they can think of a traumatized brain as one that functions differently as a result of traumatic events. They need to know that just as their brain changed in response to their past experiences with the world, it can also change in response to their future experiences. The bottom line is that their brain can learn to be strong, think clearly, make good decisions, and be aware of oneself and others. Changing the brain takes effort, repetition, and time, but it can change. Traumatized young people often live in what is called an aroused state. In many incidences, they are living in the moment and do not often see or fully appreciate the consequences of their actions. With the added stresses of being in the child welfare system, dealing with the criminal justice system, and the other complex issues our crossover young people face, such as mental health issues, addictions, etc., the effects of their trauma often get magnified, which in turn gets exhibited in their behavior that many misinterpret. What is promising is that traumatized brains can adapt and improve if given the proper support. Trauma-informed youth justice means we look through a lens of hope and healing, and we try to understand what has happened to this young person and what has contributed to the choices they are making. Instead of the traditional youth justice responses that is often about punishment and trying to look at what is wrong with the person. In no way are we indicating young people don't need to be accountable. It is just a different approach to look at how we can help young people recognize their responsibility, accept meaningful consequences, articulate their unmet needs, and heal and become more resilient. We ultimately have to help these young people become good citizens. According to Sandra Bloom's sanctuary model, trauma-informed thinking is about having an awareness of how trauma impacts young people. Trauma-informed thinking has a basic understanding of the psychological, neurological, biological, social, and spiritual impact. It recognizes at the core of any service is genuine, authentic, and compassionate. It recognizes that trauma is pervasive, and it recognizes safety, trust, choice, and control, compassion, collaboration, and strength-based thinking. Crossover youth have a right to a future that is not dictated by their past. The system we have designed to shield traumatized youth from further trauma often involves traumatizing events such as removal from the home, multiple placements in and out of home settings such as foster homes, group homes, residential treatment facilities, transfer to new schools, and separation from existing social support networks. To be trauma-informed means we must consider the impact of the traumatic events on young people. It begins with building an awareness of the trauma experiences young people may have been exposed to. It's about understanding how trauma may manifest itself in young people's behaviors and having an appreciation of the relationship between trauma and addictions, mental health concerns, and physical health. Essentials of trauma-informed care is all about us needing to connect with the young people. Focus on the relationships that are youth-centered, non-judgmental, strength-based, and anti-oppressive. It is about protect. We need to ensure the relationship is built on trust and safety. It's about respect. We need to try to engage in choice and collaboration with young people. Understand that some of their coping behaviors are a way to survive. Recognize that some of the problems they present could be transient and related to trauma. And another essential aspect of trauma-informed care is about redirect. Take moments to teach these young people new skills to cope, to manage regulation issues, to understand what their brain is doing, help them identify possible triggers, help to clarify distortions and misconceptions, and help them anticipate difficult times. Trauma-informed care is about understanding, recognizing, accepting, empowering, and responding. Now that we have a basic foundation and understanding of trauma, PTSD, the brain, and how trauma-informed approaches might look, let's finish off with some information on possible effective treatment approaches and interactions that can be of help to traumatized young people, and in particular, our crossover youth. As one can imagine, there are many ways to heal from past experiences. The challenge often becomes, what treatment approach is the right approach? A few areas to think about regardless of the treatment approach is whether or not the treatment approach will improve the symptoms of the young person. Is the young person ready to receive treatment? A very important point to understand, and this certainly supports the concept of youth voice. And the third one is, does the approach focus on restoring the individual's self-esteem and self-worth? Some of the more common treatment approaches often used would be cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. This approach focuses on changing the thought patterns that are getting in the way of life. Stress inoculation training. This focuses on learning creative strategies to deal with stress, such as deep breathing, massage, or even grounding techniques like the 5-4-3-2-1 activity, which focuses on 5 things they see, 4 things they hear, 3 things they feel, 2 things they smell, and 1 thing they taste. Dialectical behavioral therapy is another one. This is similar to CBT and has often been used with borderline personality disorder. However, they're starting to see its effectiveness in working with those suffering with PTSD. The focus here is on improving emotional management. Of course, medication. If neurotransmitters are out of whack with the young person, which might look like a fight or flight response, or easily triggered or jumpy, on edge, and emotionally cold or withdrawn, medications sometimes can help these symptoms. Medications do not get rid of the symptoms, but instead can make the symptoms less intense and more manageable. I would also like to speak on some of the work of Howard Bath, a clinical psychologist who's been working for many years in child welfare, youth justice, and mental health with young people. And much of his work has been focused around trauma. He introduced the need to help young people co-regulate. Co-regulation is often a good first step to help young persons with a trauma history self-regulate. The focus of co-regulation is on safety, connection, and coping. Sometimes traumatized young people present with numerous challenging behaviors that might look like disobedience or disrespect, yet in fact may be coming from a place of deep hurt and pain. Unfortunately, individuals working with crossover youth tend to treat the hurt and the pain punitively, which must change. Bessel van der Kolk warns people working with traumatized young people to watch the reactions we give to these challenging behaviors, because it is often out of our own frustration, and in fact, we at times may repeat the young person's early trauma, which can never be good. Co-regulation is often a good first step to help a young person with trauma history self-regulate. The focus of co-regulation is on safety, connection, and coping. Co-regulation can take many forms, but it typically involves us showing warmth towards these young people, a soothing voice tone in order to get access to the thinking part of the brain, acknowledgement of the young person's struggles, supportive silence, and an invitation to reflect on some of their struggles. It should be calming and designed to help the young person manage their overwhelming emotional arousal. Our focus is to help the young person develop more mature regulatory skills and ultimately see that people can help and emotions can be calmed. Please note that co-regulation alone is not enough, which is why it is important that we help teach young people ways to exert rational control over their emotions and impulses. Co-regulation is the first step on the pathway to self-regulation. We all need to work together to help these young people learn new skills and become more resilient. Traumatized young people need to be given the time, space, and chances to work on restoring and healing themselves. It is all of our responsibility to play a role in helping a youth get to a place of stability that will allow them the opportunity to achieve their potential. Shifting our thinking to a more trauma-informed approach will hopefully encourage all of us to examine our current practice and modify it with a view to fully incorporate a trauma-informed lens. It takes a village to raise a child, so let's all work together to build that village for our vulnerable young people.
Listen to me. Just because I am not talking, I am still speaking to you. Watch me, even if in silence. Care for me, even if I walk away from you. I need to know that you love me. I need to know that I'm okay. I need to know that I have value and am special to you. Don't talk, don't ignore me, just listen to me.